Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Antigua and I am the Director of the Office of Small Island Developing States, Least Developed Countries, and Landlocked Developing Countries. And it is my pleasure to be your moderator today at the 6th SIDS Solutions Dialogue. I wish to extend my appreciation to the permanent representatives and delegates that are here with us, including but not limited to Bahamas, Guyana, Jamaica, Mauritius, Nauru, Samoa, and the Pacific Island Forum. Also to other distinguished guests and joining us in Geneva, and as well as those of you who are joining us online. We began this SIDS Solutions Dialogue series 2 years ago as a joint effort between the FAO Liaison Offices in Geneva, Brussels, and New York, with the Office of Small Island Developing States, Least Developed Countries, and Landlocked Developing Countries to address development challenges faced by SIDS and to identify possible solutions to address them. Today, we have joined forces with the FAO Geneva Agricultural Trade Talks series, and more specifically with the FAO Markets and Trade Division to reflect on agricultural trade in SIDS and to share information on the trends, challenges, and opportunities. Small Island Developing States, or SIDS, face many similar challenges related to, among others, limited arable land, remoteness and vulnerability to external shocks such as climate change, which have a profound impact on their agri-food systems. These complex challenges are affecting various aspects of food production, distribution, and consumption, and require a concerted effort to mitigate their impacts and to build resilience. In this context, international trade plays a pivotal role to the sustainable development of SIDS, influencing their growth and their resilience, particularly given their high dependence on imported food. Trade issues are extremely relevant in the discussions leading into the 4th International Conference on SIDS that will take place from 27 to 30 May of this year in Antigua and Barbuda under the overarching theme, Charting the Course Toward Resilient Prosperity. The smooth functioning of international trade and value chains is therefore crucial, as trade-related activities in agriculture are also an important source of employment-related income opportunities. In this regard, strengthening trade capacity, promoting regional and interregional trade to improve food security and nutrition, and enhancing trade and market access through regional integration are considered priorities to better address the vulnerabilities of SIDS and build their resilience. With this in mind, we have put together an exciting program for you that highlights the trends, challenges, and opportunities of agriculture trade in SIDS. We will begin with some opening remarks from Mr. Boubacar Ben Haslan, Director, Markets and Trade Division of FAO, who will be setting the scene and providing key information concerning agri-food trade in SIDS. Next, we will move to our panel of speakers, hearing from Juan Chais, economist at the FAO Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean, who will shed some light on FAO's initiatives in the sub-region. He will be followed by the SIDS perspective and experiences from different regions, represented by Her Excellency Ms. Ushwa Shandi Duarka Kanabi, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Mauritius, Her Excellency Ms. Mary Falakama, Ambassador and Permanent Representative, Permanent Delegation of the Pacific Island Forum, and Ms. Tisha Turner, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Jamaica. We will then move to Mr. Joe Spalberg, Secretary of the Caribbean Chamber of Commerce in Europe, who will focus on the EU Caribbean market perspective. We will then have 20 minutes approximately for questions and answers, and participants in the room should raise their hands, while those in Zoom should put their questions in the Q&A module. Before we begin, some housekeeping rules for today's session. The webinar will be recorded and it will last approximately 90 minutes. Please keep your microphones muted if you're joining us online and not speaking. We do encourage you to please post your questions in the question and answer module, and we will do our best to address them during the session. And with that, once again, I welcome you to the SIDS Solutions Dialogue, and we will now pass the floor to Mr. Boubacar Ben Haslan, Director of FAO's Markets and Trade Division, who will set the scene for today's discussions. Boubacar, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Angelica. Thank you. Good afternoon from Rome. Let me share my screen. I have some slides. I hope you see my screen now. Can you confirm, please? You see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again, Angelica, and thank you for the invitation to share with you some information on SIDS. My presentation, as you mentioned, will set the scene for the panel discussion that will follow. So I will plan to provide an overall overview of the SIDS situation, and particularly with regard to their food and agricultural trade. So SIDS, as we all know, they are a diverse group of countries, but they share also some common characteristics. They are mostly located far from global markets with very low connectivity to them, as can be seen on the left graph with the blue bar representing SIDS. So you can see the difference with the other regions. They depend also on key imports, for example, with their imports of food and energy accounting for almost 40% of their GDP. And they rely on a few economic sectors, with tourism contributing by close to 1/5 or 20% of their GDP. This is, of course, on average, which is almost 4 times the global average. Overall, in terms of economic activity, SIDS represent about 1% of the global GDP, the gross domestic product. However, with Singapore accounting for almost half of that. So you can see the difference there. They also face unique economic, social, and environmental vulnerability, which I think the panel will be discussing more. And then I hope we'll be more looking toward solution, what can be done in order to overcome those challenges and to turn them into opportunities looking forward. While they, as I just showed, they share a number of characteristics, they also have considerable differences, and I will mention a few here. They are dispersed geographically, as of course we know. They are located in the 3 geographic regions, which means they can also have different climatic and agroecological conditions in relation to agriculture. They vary in size. Some SIDS are very small islands with a land mass of barely 20 square kilometers or even less, while others are much larger, for example, Papua New Guinea. They also differ in terms of economic conditions. Some are high income, such as Singapore, for instance, while others are among the group of least developed countries. Significant differences also exist with respect to the importance of the different economic sectors in terms of contributing to the economies of SIDS. Regarding primary agriculture activities, while as you can see here from the graph, the sectors is important for the Pacific SIDS, accounting for about 18% of the total economic value added, and this is looking at the average between 2017 and 2022. The sector, however, seems to be less significant for the SIDS located in the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and the Southeast China Sea. So this is also in terms of difference and the contribution of the different economic sectors to the economy of the SIDS. Here, the last bars on the right side, other activities on the graph, you see they are important, but just to mention that they refer to other services, which include tourism and financial services. Now moving to agriculture. Production is concentrated on a relatively few commodities, and these include tropical fruits, that includes also banana and plantain and other fruits, meat, poultry, bovine and pork, sugarcane, rice, and milk. For the SIDS as an aggregate, as a group, the top 20 produced commodities, which are seen here with the 3 types of meat, account for about 2/3 of the total agricultural production for the group. So you can also see the concentration in terms of production. Now, regarding the importance of the countries within the SIDS group in terms of for the crop and livestock production, It's clear also from the graph, you can see that production is even more concentrated. If we take the largest three producing states, which are the Dominican Republic, Cuba, and Papua New Guinea, together they account for 70% of the total agricultural production of the seeds. Other relatively important producing countries include Haiti, Jamaica, and Guyana, while other states are smaller in terms of agricultural or in terms of crop and livestock production. Now we look at the fisheries sector. The slide shows the share of fisheries in the value added of agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. And here it's clear that for some countries, the share is very high. We can also, or we know that overall fisheries is an important economic activity or sector for seeds, especially for those countries located in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. For the seeds group as a whole, fisheries contribute an average of about 36% to the total value added of agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. So this is just to compare the importance of the fisheries sectors for the economies of seeds. The slide here shows the trade balance for seeds, and from the graphs we can see, for instance, that overall trade in fishery products is smaller compared to trade in crop and livestock commodities. The scales are different. They are expressed in billion US dollar, but as you can see, the scales are different. So the graph could be misleading, but when you take into account the difference in the scale, you can see the difference. But nevertheless, fisheries trade is an important activity for seeds, as most of them are net exporters, contrary to the crops and livestock products. As shown by the graph on the left side, all the seeds groups are net importers of crop and livestock products. If we look at the countries and if we look at the data behind those graphs, we find that Cuba is the largest importer and the Dominican Republic is the largest exporter for the crops and livestock products. For fisheries, the net trade status here of the Caribbean seeds is mixed when it comes to countries. For example, Barbados and the Dominican Republic were the largest importers, and they had a net importing position from 2017 to 2021. Here, the statistics for fisheries go up to 2021, the available data. Whereas other countries like Guyana, the Bahamas, and Cuba were the largest exporters, and they also held a net exporting position over the same period, 2017 to 2021. This slide here shows the main agricultural commodities imported by seeds. They import a wide range of food products to supplement their domestic production and meet the demands for their populations. Based on the data that covered 2017 to 2022, the main important products are cereals and both raw and processed. They represent about 22% of the total of imports. Coffee, cocoa, tea, oilseed, and spices, 19%. Beverages, 17%. Meat, different types, 14%. Dairy products, 10%. Oils and fats, 8%. And sugar, 4%. So this is to give you a little bit of an overall idea in terms of the import composition for the seeds. Again, this is on average, and country differences certainly exist. In terms of where the seeds source their crops and livestock products, we can see that trading patterns differ depending also on the geographic location. But in general, as an observation, seeds trade with the major nearby markets, those markets that are close in terms of distance to them. For example, the Pacific seeds trade with Oceania and Asian countries for about 67% accounting for their imports for the crops and livestock products. The Caribbean seeds mainly trade with the USA and Latin American countries. And for the seeds in the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and Southeast China Sea, we can see that they sold their imports from more countries. So they are more diversified in terms of trading partners for imports. Also, just to mention that Singapore does not follow these patterns. As we all know, the country is a major commercial hub globally, so they have a different patterns for trade. Now, if we go to the fisheries products, as I said before, seeds are generally net exporters. And the chart here shows the top 5 export destination markets for the 3 seeds geographic groupings. We can see that the concentration in fishery trade is similar to that for the import of crops and livestock products. The seeds in the Caribbean export about 34% of their fishery products to the USA. Other important destination markets are Canada, China, as well as the European countries, and in particular France and Spain. For the Pacific seeds, exports of fishery products, they go mainly to Asian countries and in particular to Thailand, Japan, and the Philippines. The top 5 destination markets account for about 62% of the total fish exports for the Pacific seeds. The seeds in the Atlantic, in the ocean, and the Southeast China Sea exports their fishery products to European countries and Thailand. And like for crops and livestock products, there is similarity here. Their exports are less concentrated compared to the other seeds, as can be shown by the graphs here on displaying the shares that's for the exports toward the different export markets. So this brings me to the conclusion. I hope that I have given you an overall overview just to set again the scene for the discussion. Basically, we just the main points from my presentation is that seeds as a group, again, I mean, I want to highlight there is diversity, there are differences, but if we aggregate in terms of challenges, they face significant challenges in agriculture trade, and this is mainly due to their size and remoteness from global markets, something that increases trade-related cost, that reduces their competitiveness in terms of access to markets, and it limits, as a result, their participation in international trade. While also another point that the agri-food sector is important for the Pacific seeds, it appears to be generally small compared to the other economic activities and particularly to services. They depend on imports of food and agricultural products to feed their populations, and they are mostly net importers when it comes to crops and livestock products. For fishery products, they are mainly net exporters, even though that trade in fishery is relatively small compared to trade in crop and livestock products. So this a little bit in terms of their trade position. Also, the other point that we have seen, and this relates to their trading partners, they mostly trade within the region and within the region, and this is of course because of several factors and reasons that we can discuss during the following this presentation. And before concluding, Angelica, if I might just want to highlight, looking forward, also feeding into the discussion that would follow, is that the role that we see in FAO with regard to agriculture trade, that it is very important for food security and nutrition, and for achieving sustainable agri-food systems. So that's why also we want that the discussion focus on how trade for seeds, how it can contribute better to and how to can contribute to improving food security and nutritional outcomes. So this is also a point that I wanted to make. Also, that trade has expanded in the past, so we have more countries trading with each other. So if we compare to the last 20 or 30 years, also that the share of trade has expanded in terms of production. The share of production that's traded has increased from about 15% in 2000 to 23% over the last 3 years from 20 to 2022. And from our studies also, including the agriculture outlook that we conduct with the OECD, we see that food and agriculture trade will only expand. So this is our projection, which means that it will play even an increasing role in terms of achieving or contributing to food security and better nutrition. And as also you mentioned, and we all know the important role that's recognized for trade under the framework of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Trade is recognized as one of the key means of implementation, including under SDG 2, which aims to end hunger, improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. So I just wanted to conclude with this to again highlight the importance of trade and to set the context on how trade can hopefully contribute better, looking forward, looking to the future, to the economies, to the food sector, to the food security, to the nutrition, to growth in the seeds. With this, I conclude. I hope it was informative and it has contributed or to setting the scene for the panel discussion. Thank you, Angelica, and back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you for setting the scene for us and stressing how the high dependence of the imports in SIDS and also their dependence on a few sectors, in particular, which highlight some of their vulnerabilities to these shocks. Also, you went through there's a lot of similarities between SIDS, but there's also a lot of differences between them, so it's not a monolith, and this is a very important issue to stress. You also mentioned how on the crop and livestock they're generally importers, but in fish they're generally net exporters, so it's a bit different from that. But it's still a small share of their trade, and they tend to trade within their regions to those that are closer to them. But of course, closer a very relative term as they are remote, and you started your intervention with that. And lastly, you stressed a very important point is that trade in food and agriculture is only going to expand. And here we need to reflect further on the role of trade in contributing to achieve food security and nutrition in SIDS. And I think here I saw a lot of smiles when you made that point. So I think everybody is on board with the solution that you're offering to us here. So now I will pass the floor over to Mr. Juan Chavez, the economist at the Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean at FAO, who will present FAO initiatives in the sub-region to strengthen resilience through capacity building for better intra and extra-regional trade and market access. Juan, over to you.
Thank you, Director Boubaker and Jacome, for inviting me and for allowing me to share some of the perspectives from the Caribbean SIDS. That was a very nice setting by Director Boubaker. You will hear some echo of the points he made for the case of the Caribbean. I will do the presentation in two parts. The first part, I'd like to share some results of two studies that were recently carried out, one in 2023 and one in 2024, with FAO and IFPRI. It's about food security and agri-food trade in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the other one was done in collaboration with FAO and the Inter-American Development Bank on opportunities and challenges for agri-food trade between Central American Integration System and the Caribbean community countries. This was done in 2024. The second part of the presentation, I will share some of the work that we are doing through an integrated and tailored approach for the development of national value chains in supporting the development of various national industries and creating the conditions for more inclusive and profitable and sustainable trade. Going through the results, some of the highlights of the study that, as I said, echo very well some of the points that Director Boubaker made. We can see that in terms of global agri-food trade trends, there is an increased participation of low and middle income economies in global agri-food trade. There is a tendency for more decentralization and regionalization of countries to trade within their same region. Also, the agri-food trade composition is dominated, as previously indicated, 70% by processed products, including meats, fats and oils, wine, various prepared foods, cheeses, among others. There is an increase in the use of non-tariff measures that are applicable to agricultural products when compared to manufactured products and other products. And also, we can see that high resilience agricultural trade has actually taken place, in the face of shocks as experienced in recent years during the pandemic and during the conflict that had affected global supply chains. In terms of agri-food trade in Latin America and the Caribbean, intra-regional trade in the region is considered not to be exploited. There are a lot of opportunities stemming from high complementarity indices between the different sub-regions, derived from the capacities and the advantages of the various countries to produce a broad spectrum of food products. It is important to take advantage of such opportunities to expand trade among the countries and allow better access and availability and diversity of food, as well to better ensure a stable supply, especially in the countries that are more vulnerable and can be affected by shocks, pandemics, conflicts, or extreme weather events. Despite being a net exporter of food in aggregate terms, in the region, there are differences among the various countries, as indicated. A large part of the countries in the Caribbean and in Central America are, for example, net importers of food, particularly in those relevant for having a healthy diet like cereals, fats and oils, meat and fish, dairy and eggs, and fruits and vegetables. For the analysis of the trade opportunities developed, it is clearly shown that interregional trade in agri-food products present a high potential for expansion in products, for example, like corn, soya beans, poultry meat, soya flour, milk, and others. Also, a great potential for import substitution from extra-regional markets. More than 60%, as indicated, of agri-food purchase come from extra-regional providers in the case of the Caribbean. In terms of subregions, though, South America buys 60% from suppliers within the Latin American and Caribbean region. Central America buys 20% from suppliers within the region, and the Caribbean has seen an increase in regional participation in the last 5 years, but it only reaches 29%. Initiatives like the Food and Nutrition Security and Eradication of Hunger Plan of the Community of Latin America and the Caribbean states could be used to help leverage even further those efforts. In terms of trade between the Central American integration system and the Caribbean, nearly 50% of the exports from the Central American countries are agri-food products. The main exporters are Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Honduras, while in CARICOM, only 8.1% of exports correspond to agri-food products. The main exporters are Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. The Central American sub-region maintains an agri-food trade surplus, except in wheat and corn and rice, while in CARICOM, more than 60% of the food consumed is imported, and half of its member states import more than 80% of their food. Guyana, Belize, Suriname, and Dominica are within a tier between the 32 and the 62% of importation. Jamaica, Barbados, Haiti, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Antigua and Barbuda are within the tier between 69 and 81%, while Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, Bahamas, and the Trinidad and Tobago are within a tier of between 84 and 96% of food being imported. In terms of global trade, the main supplier of agri-food products for both sub-regions is the United States of America, followed by the European Union. Further, despite the geographical proximity among SICA and CARICOM countries, the trade in agri-food products between the two regions is relatively low, representing just 0.1% of Latin American Caribbean's agricultural trade. Agricultural trade is more concentrated in the Caribbean countries than in Central American countries and in the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic on its own is the main buyer of CARICOM agri-food, while Trinidad and Tobago is the most important importer of products from the Central American integration system. The most relevant interregional supplier-buyer countries are those that are geographically closest and have, due to the existence of regional agreements, tariff advantages over third parties, such as the case of the Dominican Republic with the CARICOM countries, or Guatemala and Belize. And third, relevant suppliers for the Caribbean countries is Costa Rica, which has a trade relationship within the region on the framework of the CARICOM Costa Rica trade agreement. Having said that, I'm not going to spend too much time on talking about the obstacles. These are the general trends, but basically argue that we cannot trade what we are not competitive in. It will be very difficult to trade if you do not have the quantity, the quality, and the consistency in the products that markets demand. It will be even more difficult if business development services like market information, technology, marketing tools, logistics, and conducive trade regimes are lacking. Partnerships are needed to address gaps and constraints. And to transition into this second part of the presentation, a value chain development approach is a good way to overcome market fragmentation, promote inclusion, improve information flows, share risks, and implement joint upgrading strategies and resource mobilization. This can all create a more solid foundation to develop trade. In the context of the Caribbean, the 25 by 2025 strategy calls for a reduction of tariffs and food tariffs on food within the region to encourage more interregional trade. That shift has been notable in the last several years. For example, Guyana has begun importing sheep from Barbados instead of New Zealand and Australia. And last year, Belize began exporting soy meal, which it typically sells outside the Caribbean to Trinidad. This effort has shown some results already, with Jamaica reporting record annual food production in both 2021 and 2022, when output topped 800,000 tons, according to the Agriculture Minister Floyd, thanks in part to bigger potato and sweet potato harvest and more raising of goats. The government incentives in Guyana have also led to greater cultivation of soy corn for animal feed, helping cut the cost of local livestock production. Guyanese Honorable President Irfan Ali estimates that meeting the 25 by 25 target will require $7.5 billion in investment across the region. CARICOM has not yet tallied the total investment so far that would be needed, but the plan will need significant private sector outlays in the coming year, according to the CARICOM private sector organization. I like to argue, having said that, taking advantage of trade that is more inclusive, that is more beneficial, for all, it starts by developing, these strong national value chains, and that we need to select, promote, and develop strong subsectors in the context of all these different initiatives that I have already alluded to. And in that sense, FAO in the Caribbean, we have been for the last 4 or 5 years supporting an integrated value chain development approach that basically has the objective of strengthening these high potential agricultural value chains, replace food imports, strengthen current domestic supply, and increase exports. This is done through an application of a market-driven approach to enhance competitiveness and resilience in the agricultural sector, increase market access, and attract development and investment finance. The outcome is aligned with FAO's program priorities in relation to contributing to improve market transparency and equitable participation in markets, global value chains, and international trade through policy coordination and human and institutional capacities for evidence-based decision-making. What makes an agricultural subsector strong? A good quality, reliable, safe products that consumers want. Farmers, including women, men, youth, producing for a clearly defined market and a buyer, if possible. A suitable and a growing production base, organized and structured value chain, including between farmers and buyers. Increasing adoption of good agricultural practices and technologies to improve productivity. Good post-harvest and quality assurance practices. Support services, providing support where is needed in terms of extension, research and development, policy, statistics, plant health, etc., including, of course, targeting women and youth agri-entrepreneurs, and of course, leadership and champions, people working together through regional collaboration where it makes sense. These are some of the aspects that in our integrated program we are supporting. We are supporting, rapid value chain assessment. More than 60 value chain assessments have been carried out around the region. We support cost of production analysis, both in terms of what the situation is and what those optimal, cost of production should be. We develop industry upgrading strategy around several priority products. We develop the business models for those to support public-private partnerships and attract public investment and market access. We provide, as part of pilot implementation, production training, and start implementing some of those elements of the upgrading strategies. And we are trying to mobilize impact investment through driving innovative finance and sustainable investment. This all, we also aim to support evidence-based policy and decision-making. So this integrated, not looking only piecemeal as is often done, but looking at trade, supported by value chains and looking at different aspects related to agricultural data, technology, public-private partnerships, and in addition, and where needed, land banks, good agricultural practices, the business models, the access to finance is the approach that we are trying to follow to support trade. These are some of the examples in the countries and the products that we've been supporting. We've been working in Antigua on sheep, on Barbados on honey and sweet potatoes, Belize on tilapia and soursop, in Dominica with sea moss and sweet potatoes. In Grenada, also sea moss and soursop. In Guyana, we've been supporting the brackish water shrimp and the tropical cherry and sheep sectors. In Jamaica, we have successfully, supported the spices industry. In St. Lucia, we're starting to work with the pork industry, with coconuts and with ginger. St. Kitts and Nevis, we're working with tilapia, lettuce and sweet peppers, and finally in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on sheep, hot peppers, and the sheen. One good example of how we have applied the whole process and where it has led has been the case of Jamaica, where we have been able to support the revamping of an industry that for the last 10 years have been decimated due to the rise of rot. We have supported the whole process, and today we have created the conditions for the USDA Food for Progress program to select Jamaica to be the recipient of a 20 million grant that will help implement specific aspects of the upgrading strategy. These are some of the highlights of, in the different countries of where we're working. And with that, I'm sorry if I went over the time. Director Jacome, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Juan, for sharing the perspectives of the Caribbean SIDS, and you shared with us a bit about the 25 by 25 CARICOM initiative, which is a very important initiative that will definitely help intra-regional trade. You highlighted the importance of having private sector allies to take this forward. Also, how inclusive trade requires the development of strong agricultural subsectors, and FAO is supporting in this regard through its value chain development program. And this is an integrated approach that is not trying to address it in a piecemeal way, but really looking at the comprehensive aspects and supporting Caribbean SIDS. Thank you very much. Now, as anticipated, we'll be hearing from 3 different SIDS perspectives. And to kick off, I wish to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Usha Shandi Dwarka Kanavadi, Ambassador Permanent Representative of Mauritius to the UN in Geneva and to the WTO. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Megan. I wanted to say you feel a bit foolish, talking in front of these FAO people who are experts and know exactly what's going in SIDS. But we thought, let's share a few thoughts there and see what happens. First, let me share this piece of news that the European Court of Justice has just ruled that climate inaction is equivalent to the violation of human rights. So if you're planting your bananas wrongly, you might actually be violating human rights somewhere without knowing. So we're hoping the FAO can help us on that one. These things are quite serious. The commercial implications of these judgments, if taken seriously, can have quite a few implications for us. I come back to the point that was made initially. We know the SIDS. We're a diverse group of countries, but we have 2 things in common. Remoteness, yes, you mentioned that, but I would say I don't think Singapore is remote from its main markets. I would say basically absence of economy of scale and vulnerability. If you look at the economic vulnerability index, 25 out of 40 are SIDS. And I mean, that's not surprising. So where does that take us? Can we be actually commercially competitive in agriculture? I have a lot of doubts there. And I would say that basically we are competitive on agriculture when we are focused on specific commodities and if we have a secure market. And this has been the case for a long time for us for bananas and sugar under the ACP agreements, where we managed to actually have what we call the green gold for bananas and manage to secure sufficient money to help with development in other sectors and the diversification of the economies of our countries, including in services and manufacturing. But interestingly enough, after the dispute at the WTO over sugar and bananas, we're still producing sugar and bananas. We don't have the preferential market there. And I put this down, it's a thought, of course, for the FAO to correct me. It's a thought that we had enough time from the time of having a secure market to be able to develop a certain expertise in this. And I take the case of Mauritius, for example, on Bonsucro, the certification programs, AFNOR, there are a lot of things that we've been able to do. Bits of technology like drip by drip method that came in at the time, and knowing how the market works. Because we knew how the European market worked for having been in it for long enough to be able to even export sugar to Suzuka afterwards and to others. But interestingly enough, as I think you said rightly, Lia Juan, we are exporting more to the region. And we're exporting sugar a lot to the region in the case of Mauritius, for example, including to countries like Kenya. In fact, our sugar has been displaced by some countries subsidizing their sugar and exporting them to the region as well, which makes us cross, but we're still exporting sugar. And the same for bananas. When you look at Dominica and you look at St. Lucia, for example, they're still importing bananas. But these, of course, have now a much less important presentation in GDP terms, but they still employ quite a few people. So at least in that sense, socioeconomically, it is still important. So yes, keep on giving us secured markets, and I think we can still develop our expertise in time to be able to do it. And this is what takes me to the second point. I want to thank FAO here, because I know you're doing a lot of work under the Samoa Pathway. Not only the Global Action Program, but on individual projects as well. And I'm thinking of FAO China, South-South Cooperation Project, where you have all these building resilience in agri-food systems business that was launched last year. There's also, for example, the Africa Solidarity Fund of $1.5 million, which you're using to help the African small islands, for example, there. So there is money available. Money is being used well. What we need is to make sure that we actually get a good enough revenue on that one. And it won't happen if we go into the free market. Had we been producing banana and sugar alongside Brazil and Ecuador, with Kenana and Sudan and others, when we had just started, we would have been nowhere today, for sure. We would not have been exporting anything at all. So bear in mind that we're vulnerable, and let's try to find a carve-out for SIDS that tells us they're so minor, their exports, that we need to help them. And how do you help us? Again, this question of European Court of Justice, climate action. If we are producing things in a friendly way, and for example, the certifications I mentioned point to the fact that we can produce things in an environmentally friendly way, then you need to pay us for preserving biodiversity. We're trading in the region, so you need to pay us for not having a huge carbon imprint. And we're doing everything that you cannot do. You're just adding to our troubles, not doing anything at all. So how are you going to compensate us? We need FAO to get a bit more political there, not only technical, and try to help us find solutions in that. Then I noticed one thing, for example, you're trying to do, for example, in Mauritius, one of the things you're trying to help us is Global Environment Facility Funds to help them what they produce turmeric. And this turmeric will be turned into powder and sent elsewhere. There's also the UNDP UN Women Project, which is trying to use seaweed to do biofertilizers. These are all natural. There's nothing there, and I think this is where you need to have money. So I come up with a crazy idea. And the crazy idea is this, is that if people are willing to pay for CBAM, to pay their own polluting producers in their continent to start turning green, then they can pay us as well for actually doing what they are now starting to do, I think, on that one. So I just want to put that across, because I think sometimes we spend a lot of time talking theory, but in terms of practice and taking these forwards under agricultural negotiations, for example, we are fighting for food security. What is the solution for us? Most SIDS are net food importers, very few are food exporters. And what some of the SIDS can produce are what I need, but I cannot produce. Milk and rice are good examples of that. Madagascar used to produce rice. We used to import rice from Madagascar. They no longer produce rice. So the question is, they're too far for me to import from them, but I'm not going to change my diet. So it's a difficult one of how to be able to access those things that we need. Now, in the agricultural negotiations, what we said is that the net food import in developing countries. Who really want to import foods and really need it for their food security. It's food terms, not for processing purposes. They should be given priority access and there should be no export ban. When you apply an export ban, they should not be affected with the need this for their security. And after COVID, what I find now with SIDS is that we are saying to ourselves, we need to be more self-sufficient because the food bill has shot up. I think, as you said, right, the food bill is already so high. In Mauritius, it's 20% of our imports is just the food bill as such. And we're just 25% self-sufficient. We can increase that. But the reality is that we cannot always produce what we want to consume, what we have been traditionally consuming. So we have a difficulty of trying to meet those two things. So what is it that you do? What is it that you can do in that case? Changing food patterns is difficult. And I say this to you knowing that in 1982, the World Bank came and told us you've got to stop eating rice. You must start eating potatoes and cassava. It was a very difficult one. It was a very difficult one. It's like I come to you and tell you guys stop eating plantain, you know. You really must just eat bread from now on and baguettes only and nothing else on that one. So that food thing is a difficult one because we need to find substitutions. And governments have been trying, but somehow it's taking a very long time. And I'll give you a couple of examples. For the past 5 years, Mauritius has been trying to push organic products. We've given we want to create an agro food park. We are saying, okay, food clustering, food processing clustering. We're giving grants for seeds. We're giving tax holidays, trying to help people. There is no interest. And I think that interest, it's not that there's no interest from people, it's that people look at the opportunity cost. I'd rather still be producing sugar because I earn much more than producing macadamia nuts, because macadamia nuts, I'm not sure what the market is. I'm not sure where I can sell it and how much I will get out of it. So I think this is an area, the marketing part, where ITC and FAO could perhaps try and work together to help us to find those markets that we so desperately need. And perhaps the last thing I want to say is climate change. I know FAO is helping us, so is IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is trying to make our own fruits, our own vegetables more resistant to heat, for example. And I want to say this because what I'm not saying is a sort of coming together of institutions to try and say, okay, let's look at SIDS together, what each one of us is doing, and how we could put our heads together to see, is there anything that we can do better in that direction? I'm not talking fishes because my sister Mary will do that. So I'll leave it there and then come back with some more provocative questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I see that you gave us a very thought-provoking intervention where you're stressing a lot the need for these niche markets that you need to come up with securing markets for them. And then while it's very interesting, how do you ensure that the markets are there? And this is part of what that you're requesting, that the international community, not only FAO, do this. Some of this work on niche markets, we are working through it through the FAO China South Cooperation Trust Fund. There'll be some of the focus in some of the SIDS on that, and I'm sure that a lot of the different questions that you raised, the experts online can address. Another very interesting point that you made is the issue of the ECG decision on climate inaction and how it can be considered an HR violation. I think FAO does a lot of important work on climate change. We were highly involved in the COP28 negotiations, which had a big agri-food systems lens. And among some of the interesting things that were launched there by FAO is the FAO Global Roadmap, achieving SDG 2 without reaching the 1.5 Celsius threshold. This is not a webinar on this, but I can share information with you later on that. So with that, I will now turn to Her Excellency Ms. Mary Palikama, Ambassador Permanent Representative of the Permanent Delegation of the Pacific Island Forum. And Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for this opportunity. First, let me say good afternoon to colleague ambassadors and also to experts that are in the room. I wish to also extend the appreciation of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat to the FAO office and also the FAO Liaison Office here, including Director Mr. Burgeon, for organizing this event and for inviting the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat to participate We also want to commend the FAO Director General for creating a new office focusing on seeds, LDCs, and the landlocked countries. I understand that this is perhaps the first technical UN agency that has replicated the New York UN structure to have a particular focus on seeds. And I also wanted to thank the presentation from FAO that have been made on the trade trends, challenges, as well as opportunities for seeds in agricultural trade, and the examples that were given from the Caribbean region. I guess my work has been will benefit a lot from what Ambassador Kanabadi has mentioned. And I think the reality for seeds really go to the heart of some of the points that she stressed, which I wanted to stress today. The presentations by the FAO have clearly articulated the challenges that seeds face in agriculture, production, and trade. And these are all well known and documented. But I just wanted to make 3, maybe 4 points here, just to underline some of the issues, particularly from the Pacific point of view. And I just wanted to also thank FAO again for the challenge, for the presentation that was made on the trade trends. My first point relates to climate change, something that Ambassador Kanabadi had mentioned, and this is the single greatest threat to sustainable agriculture, and for many of the Pacific countries. And I noted from the presentation that was made by the FAO on the trade trends and challenges, this was not probably picked up, the climate change aspect. But for us, there are 2 aspects of this for the Pacific. There are 2 aspects. First, the slow onset of climate change that is causing ocean warming, sea level rise, resulting in seawater intrusions in food gardens, and are also eroding the shores of the Pacific Islands. Already, as we noted, we are very small, our land sizes are very small. But the fact that sea level rising is now affecting food gardens in the Pacific is a major issue for this, for food security for many of the Pacific Island countries. Agriculture is an important sector for us, firstly for subsistence purposes, food security and livelihoods, as well as to promote our economic development through exporting the few agricultural exports that we trade, one of which is sugar that Ambassador Kanabadi also mentioned. But this is a real problem, climate change. And I think to be able to understand and to try and assist the Pacific countries, climate change will need to be built into any work on agriculture because of the slow onset that we are seeing. So that's on the agriculture side, but of course the ocean warming is causing acidification and also affecting the migratory patterns of fish stocks. And so that's another serious problem when you look at the ocean sustainability. But on the second aspect, of course, is the sudden onset of climate change. And these are from natural disasters. And we note, many of us know that natural disasters are getting more frequent and more severe. And the sectors that are almost always affected is agriculture. And for the Pacific countries, we've had our share of severe cyclones, and every year we find that cyclones are getting more and more severe. And many of these cyclones can reduce agricultural production for up to 85%. And this, of course, in turn reduces our ability to export, our exports performance, sometimes leading to loss of markets, because markets cannot wait for you to help, to get your agriculture sector to recover and wait for the next season next year. They have to find markets to source their pawpaws from, or to source their ginger from, or whatever it is. So for us, that is a major challenge. Trying to deal with climate change, trying to build a resilient agricultural sector in the face of climate change, which is continuing to unfold, getting more and more intense. So, I think in the words of the presentation from FAO, we need a resilient agriculture, sustainable agri-food systems to be able to do that. So we need, at least for the Pacific, this is one area where we will need help. The second point, and relating to agriculture production systems that relate particularly to trade, is our ability to meet supply side or the standards and technical quarantine standards and technical, particularly the TBT standards, the technical barriers that are imposed by our exporting or importing countries on agricultural export standards. And for that, we are also still have an important work to do on our side, because the moment we start to try and diversify from exports of raw agricultural products to processed, semi-processed or processed, the TBT barriers start to come up. So here we need help. And secondly, as mentioned also by my colleague Ambassador Kanapati, the EU's Green Deal, and increasingly in the future, there will be new restrictions on environment, climate change related measures. So this is something that we will need to take on board as part of building resilient agricultural systems to comply with any new regulations that are going to come from new environmental measures that are going to be imposed on our agricultural products. We, the Pacific, are studying the impact of the EU's deforestation regulation, because that will affect the way we export cocoa, coffee, palm oil products, which are exported from some of the Pacific countries into the European Union. And we know, so there will have to be some accreditation system or certification systems that will need to accompany those measures. And we know the EU is not the only one that has introduced this. There are others waiting in line to, and already starting to think about what measures that they will impose as they transition towards green economy. So the interesting thing about the EU's deforestation regulation, it does not only affect cocoa opportunity itself, it will also affect the derivatives of this product. So if we are making chocolates from the cocoa and exporting them, as some of our Pacific countries are having to do, then that will also be affected. So the product and the derivatives. So it's something that we need to take on board, and FAO that is listening to this. My third point relates to the fact that that we are highly dependent on imports, and this is the point that came up clearly in the presentation. And because of that, because of this high dependence on imports, it is also affecting nutrition effect. So health bills are getting higher and higher, increasingly apart from the rising food cost. Imported food, it is also affecting the our ability to also contributing to high levels of non-communicable diseases in the Pacific. And I know WHO, the Pacific is one of those regions with high levels of density. So FAO, with the emphasis on food, I think there needs to be a holistic approach to agriculture production, trade, and food. But we need to tackle these things holistically rather than in silos. The high dependence on food import is a particular issue for us. I think when we share the point that net food import in developing countries, like this is have a major interest in the negotiations, especially in the WTO, on how we can mitigate the imports to make sure that they are accessible. We also need to ensure that these are nutrition balance. Probably another side point about the WTO negotiation is public stockholding systems for seeds. Something that we can also definitely look at. And probably the last point that I want to make is some of our countries are also moving towards food agriculture, but they need to have the technology and the resources to be able to transition. So if we are going to have to meet the technical regulations of our major markets, then we will need to be assisted in transition. Access to finance, which is also highlighted by the is an important factor in this. And we must make sure that these facilities, these multilateral finance facilities, and from multilateral, including from multilateral institutions, are made accessible to cities to be able to help them transition. So we really see the role for FAO to help us in building resilient agriculture, ensuring that our supporting us in the discussions that we had in the WTO to ensure that their food importing countries that are reliant on imports can be assisted to the restrictions and also to make sure that when we financing instruments, it also takes account of climate change impacts going to strongly influence agriculture.
Very much. The essential need for a very integrated approach, and you started off mentioning climate change, and then the issue of the need for capacity building to meet certain standards that are now being, that importing countries have put on developing countries and the markets, and how some of the measures to combat climate change will also imply the implications on trade. You also mentioned the issue of nutrition and health, and particularly the links with NCDs, and how some of the aspects of the high importing, with the increased importing of food has affected this, because there's a lot of processed food being consumed. So FAO is advocating for a systems approach, and this is part of our strategic framework. We talk about agri-food systems transformation, and all of this, we bring in this integrated approach, and we see all the interactions and the trade-offs between these different issues. So we're very excited about your presentation and how you put it all together in one very eloquent statement. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Tisha Turner, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Jamaica. So Ms. Turner, the floor is over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Excellencies, colleagues, audience online and in person. Just straight to the point, agriculture accounts for approximately 8% of the GDP in Jamaica and employs 10 to 25% of the population in many Caribbean countries. So for this reason, we welcome the SIDS Solution Dialogue on agricultural trade. Now, all SIDS share common characteristics, as already been mentioned. However, given the regional diversity, we must be reminded that there are features that are unique to SIDS as well as within regions, as Director Boubacar indicated in his presentation. Intra-regional transportation continues to be a major problem for the Caribbean in accessing agricultural markets. as do the challenges presented by access to financing, already said, and climate-smart agricultural technology. In the time available, I hope to provide some concrete examples from Jamaica and the Caribbean on the challenges and resilience-building responses, while contextualizing this dialogue as it relates to the WTO agricultural discussions. Now, we've already heard about the trends which directly affect SIDS, which are also net food importing developing countries and FIDCs, competing for limited available global supplies, resulting in higher prices for otherwise economically disadvantaged and challenged countries. As was mentioned earlier in response, CARICOM has and still remains committed to the 25 by 2025 initiative, which was intended to reduce the region's $5 billion food import bill by next year, 2025, by 25%. Now, this includes pursuing import substitution policies that support an increase in regional agricultural production and engender shift away from extra-regional imports. Nevertheless, even as there's to be a shift by NFIDC SIDS towards more local and regional production, the prevailing and ever worsening climate change and water challenges create an unpredictable environment for achieving agricultural productivity and guaranteeing food security in SIDS. So this takes me to the challenges which we've already heard: climate change and water. The international literature highlights a strong relationship between climate change and agricultural production. The increase in the frequency and intensity of natural disasters, which can decimate the GDP of a country literally in the snap of a finger, presents a seemingly insurmountable obstacle for sustainable development in the region. Let us look specifically at the impact of Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. In Dominica, the agricultural sector was totally devastated, 100% loss of crops, substantial damage to trees and livestock. In Antigua and Barbuda, which will play host to the 4th International Conference on SIDS next month, the island of Barbuda was left totally uninhabitable. In Jamaica, it is projected that we will lose approximately 40% of our agricultural land due to rising sea levels in coastal areas by the end of the century. Regarding water, agriculture and fisheries are water-intensive sectors which are key to some of the most water-scarce countries in the world. SIDS, albeit we're surrounded by the Caribbean Sea in the case of the Caribbean and oceans. As Samuel Taylor Coleridge in his poem said, "Water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink." And so the impact of climate change on rainfall and precipitation levels, and consequently, water scarcity, is a priority consideration. In the case of Barbados, there's a heavy reliance on groundwater resources for 90% of the water supply. In Jamaica, rainfall is the primary source of water in the country. So prolonged periods of low rainfall, which fail to recharge aquifers at a sustainable level, is a major challenge. For these reasons, climate change and environmental discussions are a priority to SIDS. However, there is a tendency in global environmental trade talks to treat with SIDS, who are not the major contributors, in the same fashion as they do the major contributors to the problem, particularly in the design and implementation of environmental regulations. The multilateral trade discussions on environment and climate change appear devoid of any acknowledgement of the special challenges facing SIDS, which are at the epicenter of the deteriorating global environment, and we remain the main advocates for changes in the policies to tackle climate change and environmental issues. So a targeted and effective response to address these trade-related challenges, which arise from environmental issues, therefore remains lacking and is a glaring omission in the international discourse. In the context of the WTO, some of the committees, such as the Committee on Trade and Environment, the Committee on Sanitary and Phytosanitary Standards, the Committee on Technical Barriers to Trade, do address some of these issues which would appear to be akin to trade measures which would obstruct free trade and hamper the development prospects of the majority of WTO members. My final challenge would be on the size, which has already been touched on, as it says in the name small. The lack of economies of scale and competitive producers in small states relative to the global food chain exacerbates the vulnerabilities of SIDS on the global agricultural market, not only as competitors, but as we've heard earlier, more importantly for food security purposes. One of the signal points from the MC13, that's the 13th Ministerial Conference for the WTO agricultural discussions, and one of my roles there is I act as the CARICOM focal point in the agricultural negotiations, was a push by some countries to remove specific reference to NFIDCs in the text in favor of a qualified, more generic phraseology. Now, this would have implications for the flexibilities accorded to NFIDCs. One of the reasons raised was that there was a systemic challenge with how the list, the NFIDC listing, was done in terms of the inclusion and graduation of the members from the list. However, this is not a challenge posed by SIDS, yet, as was earlier indicated, the most vulnerable with almost all CARICOM SIDS importing more than 60% of the food consumed, and half of CARICOM members importing over 80% of the food consumed were bearing the brunt. So finally, to some of the opportunities, because from the challenges and risks, we do see some opportunities, and SIDS in the Caribbean, we're keen on building resilience, not just to build back better after natural disasters, but to implement strong and effective infrastructure and systems in a forward-facing manner that can facilitate our sustainable development. Some of this we've heard before, the 25 by 2025, which focuses on some of the high import crops, niche vegetables, for instance. In Jamaica, we have the new FACE initiative, which is looking at food security, agribusiness development, climate smart technology, and export expansion. In Barbados, you have the FEED initiative, that's the Farmers Empowerment and Enfranchisement Drive, which is looking at increasing investment in the sector by providing infrastructure and support services. We had touched on the matter of the global supply chains, which has become increasingly keen post-COVID. So if we look at the WTO discussions, paragraph 6 of the Abu Dhabi Declaration, which underscores the need for open, inclusive, sustainable, resilient, diversified, and reliable global supply chains. These are all catchphrases it might sound like. And so we need to move from the catchphrases to actual action, which will allow for quick recovery from crises and disruptions for production and trade. A further opportunity, as we look within the context of the WTO, is how can we respond effectively, having created these mandates? How do we respond effectively to these mandates for focused further treatment of SIDS in the debate? There's an upcoming session on the Committee on Agriculture. If you look at the agenda, it will discuss technology transfer, so members need to be there. We'll also have an opportunity to reconsider what we thought was already lost in terms of the report on the way forward on food security for LDCs and NFIDCs. We need to be in those discussions. But it's also an opportunity for other developed partners to demonstrate their solidarity and commitment with SIDS, in addition to, as raised earlier, the need for increased capacity building and investment in sustainable agri-food systems. We heard, I think it was 7.5 billion raised by Director One in his presentation. So in closing, I'm going to leave you with this question. As trade discussions evolve to include conversations on trade and environmental sustainability and other emerging matters, is it now time to very clearly acknowledge SIDS in global trade to ensure their contribution or the contribution of the existing and new trade routes to our sustainable development? And I say this within the context of the fight that we had to include SIDS in the outcome document, to include NFIDCs in the agricultural text. From my view, I think, yes, given that the challenges, inherent vulnerabilities are well known, well established, we think the FAO has a role to play in assisting us there. I think yes, but perhaps I should ask you, what do you think? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tisha, for again another thought-provoking. This has been a series of thought-provoking interventions, and I think a bit on your halfway ending point on the opportunities that because the challenges, as you mentioned, are quite well known. And so there's the opportunities to build resilience and infrastructure through programs such as the 25 by 25, the FACE initiative in Jamaica, the FEED initiative in Barbados. You stress that we need to move from discussion to action. And one thing that really I think I would like to draw attention to you is how these discussions are priority discussions for SIDS and how to bring the SIDS voice. And I think opportunities like this, where we have an opportunity, to exchange and to hear different perspectives and to have, technical presentations plus a lot of the input from, the political negotiators. I think these are important initiatives in order to raise that voice within all types of discussions and every type of fora. So thank you very much. To conclude the panelist section, I would now like to bring our last panelist, Mr. Joe Spalberg, Secretary and Executive Director of the Caribbean Chamber of Commerce in Europe. Mr. Spalberg, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Bonjour, Genève. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for those of you in the Caribbean. My name is Joe Spalberg. I'm the Secretary General and Executive Director of the Caribbean Chamber of Commerce in Europe. I have a short presentation I would like to share with you. First of all, a few words about our chamber. We are a multilateral non-for-profit business services organization, an AISBL according to corporate Belgium law. We are based at the Brussels Chambers of Commerce, and we're part of a cluster of chambers of commerce, including Central American and South American chambers. After the introduction to SIDS by Mr. Ben Belhassen and Mr. Charles Pilaz, I just wanted to highlight the Caribbean. We are a small region, but between 30 and 60 million inhabitants, depending on what countries and territories are included as part of the region. In an area of roughly the same dimensions as continental Europe, exclusive of Russia, with the difference that we have a big Caribbean Sea in the middle of what we call the Greater Caribbean. More than a third, 16 out of 39 countries and territories in the region are SIDS, which include, apart from the Antilles, one country in Central America, Belize, you can see on the map on the left, and two countries in South America, Guyana and Suriname, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, which of course are not islands, but do have many islands as part of their territory. Furthermore, not less than 13 out of 18 Caribbean countries and territories are associate members of the UN Regional Commissions for SIDS, which include many of the American, British, Dutch, and French OCTs. As one of the most diverse multicultural regions in the world, we are also one of, if not the region in the world that is most dependent on tourism. This is important to note in light of the economic development and the role of the agricultural sector, on which a bit more later on. Now, CCC's mission is simple and twofold. On one hand, to facilitate trade between the Caribbean and Europe, and on the other hand, to promote all types of investment from Europe to the Caribbean in support of sustainable economic growth. So while our chamber works across all economic sectors, the key sectors for development of our region are listed here. Firstly, of course, agriculture, which is the traditional stronghold of the Caribbean since the colonization of European powers in the beginning of the 16th century. The region's development was primarily based on the plantation economy. And these are the other sectors of key importance for the economic development of our region, which apart from tourism, which we mentioned before, are to be kept in mind since some of these sectors go hand in hand with the agricultural development, as we will see. Now, with regards to the import and export of agricultural products in and from the Caribbean, we have a look at the structure of agri-food trade between the European Union and CARIFORUM, which are the two major trading blocs across the Atlantic, showing, firstly, a significant growth during the last decade. You can see the imports and exports from each region here from 2012 to 2022. These are the latest figures that have been made available. You will see that there has been a considerable growth since the pandemic. With regards of the import and export of agricultural products in and from the Caribbean, this overview confirms that in spite of the Economic Partnership Agreement, the EPA, that was signed as the first ACP region with the EU back in 2008, the Caribbean has not really benefited from the trade agreement. In fact, the trade surplus has gradually been phased out and grew into a greater trade deficit for the Caribbean. If we look at the bigger picture, the total trade in goods between the two parties has not expanded considerably from 2008 to 2018, according to the recent report of the CARIFORUM EPA evaluation study, on which one of our experts and advisory board members participated. The total value of goods traded, imports plus export, amounted to 9.5 billion euros in 2008, and it was slightly lower in 2018 when it stood at 9 billion euros. So this decrease can be largely attributed to a downfall of CARIFORUM exports to the EU, for which the average annual growth rate was -2% over this evaluation period, while EU exports to the CARIFORUM increased, with an average growth rate which is more than double. So the EU trade surplus has grown further from 1.2 billion in 2018 to 5.5 billion euros in 2022, as you can see here, while it had a negative trade balance with CARIFORUM at the start of EPA of 280 million euros, which means a 20-fold increase. So despite the limited benefits at aggregate level, there are, of course, differences between countries and sectors, which you've heard of before from the previous presenters. The developments of trade in goods varies considerably across countries, and several countries experience large fluctuations in exports to the EU. If we have a closer look at the latest figures of 2022 here, the agri-food imports of the EU from CARIFORUM by product category, the export of fruits and nuts account for about 1/3 of exports from the Caribbean. Traditional crops, coffee, tea, cocoa, and spices are on par with tobacco, which together account for 1/4, and spirits and liquors about 1/5 of Caribbean exports to the EU. CARIFORUM exports in beverages have fluctuated since the EPA, and key challenges faced by exporters are related to issues such as market intelligence, finding a distributor in the EU, or logistics areas where CCCE can provide assistance. In terms of export of food and live animals, there has been a strong increase in fish and seafood, mainly driven by Belize, Jamaica, and Suriname. Fruits and nuts, driven mostly by the Dominican Republic, and cocoa and tobacco, also driven by the Dominican Republic. An analysis of export potential shows that agri-food products that have shown growth in market share have potential for further development. Apart from traditional export products like sugar and bananas, there are many agro-food products like juices, nutraceuticals, for example, in Jamaica, organic produce coming from the Dominican Republic, and some investment promotion agencies in the region also see opportunities for niche, high-value crops like vanilla, medicinal herbs, and superfoods. On the other hand, as you can see here, the agri-food exports from the EU to CARIFORUM by product category for the same year show that dairy products account for 1/4 of EU exports to the Caribbean, followed by fruits, nuts, and vegetables, only 10% ahead of processed food products, wine and wine-based products, while the great majority, more than 40%, accounts for remaining agro-food products, which include pet food, forage crops, horticulture, and other non-edible products for technical use. Now, the fact that exports from the EU to the CARIFORUM increased more than the other way around is not surprising, as CARIFORUM was already enjoying preferential access to the EU market, while no such access was available for EU exporters prior to the agreement. The decrease in CARIFORUM exports to the EU reflects the decreasing share of EU in total CARIFORUM trade, as other markets have also become more important for CARIFORUM exports. Now, what does the Caribbean need to do to reverse this downward trend of growing trade deficit? As you can imagine, SIDS are proportionally harder hit by global forces of climate change, soil degradation, and increasing competition from other larger countries, as mentioned by some of the previous presenters. Moreover, for the agricultural sector, we can identify the following major key requirements, which are reminiscent of growing trends and development in the region. Firstly and foremostly, food security, which has been mentioned before, and this has become a top priority for CARICOM. The Caribbean community's goal to reduce food imported to the region by 25% by 2025 is not only the result of realization of food dependence during the pandemic, but successive crises and devastating natural hazards, as mentioned before, and rising costs over the last years, which have left many people in the Caribbean struggling to earn a living and meet their food and other critical needs. Secondly, we need to realize more linkages with other sectors, which Mr. Charles Pillars presented before, in particular, the ever important hospitality and tourism industry in the region with more than 30 million visitors per year. And these are just stayover visitors, not taking into account cruise arrivals. This has been talked about for decades, but progress to forge these linkages is only being made over the last few years, in particular since the pandemic, and linkages with some other sectors are also being forged through the development of renewable energies, for example. More efforts are being made to produce biofuels to replace fossil fuels. Thirdly, the worldwide trends of diversification of the agricultural sector through flex farming, organic farming, conservation agriculture is slowly but surely finding ground in the Caribbean, whereby innovative new methods are resulting in higher and more diversified production, inclusive of non-native crops. So, consequently, and in conclusion, we can speak of a revival of the agricultural sector, which have resulted in many initiatives with the help of many, sometimes competing donor agencies supporting new projects in the region, and the answer can be sought in agritech. While the EU announced at the end of last year to make 19 million euros available to support the enhancement of agri-food systems in the Caribbean as part of their farm-to-fork strategy and global gateway policy, the private sector needs to be engaged more to increase trade in equipment and machinery, investment for domestic production and exports, and efficiency-enhancing services. Regarding trade in equipment and machinery, a recent EU study underscored the need for irrigation agriculture, fruit and vegetable packaging, storage and conservation chain improvement, and new climate-adapted production systems. Apart from these requirements, the Caribbean needs to adapt a new structural approach to achieve greater food security and diversification and higher value linkages of agriculture with other sectors, where we, as the Caribbean Chamber of Commerce in Europe is concerned, can only be achieved through effective public and private sector partnerships. So we've come to the end of my conclusion, of my presentation, sorry. I wanted to thank Mr. Al-Kahafi and his team in Brussels for giving me the opportunity to present today. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Spalberg, for your intervention and for highlighting how the Caribbean can reverse the downward trend in the trade deficit, in particular through an increased focus on food security, increased linkages to other sectors, including tourism, and the increasing diversification of the economies, and how the role of technology, specifically agritech, to help you get there. We have now come to the end of our panelist session, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their very thought-provoking interventions. We have very little time, but I will just look around here in the room to see if there's any questions. And since I don't see anything, I was wondering if Mr. Ben Hassan, if Boubacar, you'd like to give a bit of a final thought from your end before we conclude the dialogue.
Thank you, Angelica, and thank you. Now, I'm very happy to take part in this. I think it's a very rich discussion. It's very clear. I mean, we are talking about issues that are very important, and that priorities for government, for countries, and issues that relate to trade. Of course, they are also sensitive when it comes to because different countries are in different situation, different contexts, different objectives, and so on and so forth. So there is no one solution, and we have seen also what this applies to the seeds, given the diversity and different challenges. Nevertheless, I think I want just to thank Mr. Joe Spalberg. I think at the end he gave us a positive view, I would say, to how we can going forward, how we can tackle some of those issues and what we can do. I think Angelica, we started also from the beginning how to move from words and talk to action. I think this is everybody that we wanted that to happen, to see. We have the knowledge, I think, by working together, and this is also I want to underline. In FAO, we stress on the importance of working hand in hand with the government, because I think the countries, the people in the country, the government, they know much better than us in terms of the context, in terms of what needs to be done. However, we can bring the knowledge, we can bring experience from the different contexts, from the different countries, and with a global the global view. So we are there to help. And I just also want, I think, to address the point by the honorable representative from Jamaica, on whether it's important to acknowledge seeds. I can confirm from FAO side, yes. I mean, this is something that's very important for us. Seeds or those country groups that they face challenges, specific challenges, and that's why we always highlight the importance of fair, equitable, non-discriminatory, multilateral trading system. So it is very, very important. And in my view, personal view, it's only by recognizing the needs and the challenges and the specific needs of this country that we can see a multilateral trading system that flourish and that benefit all. So this is, I can confirm from the FAO side that that's something we highlight, and that's something we consider very important. Also, in my presentation, I know I did not mention some of the challenges. I probably because I came from the angle of more markets and trade and focusing more, but of course, essentially, we recognize the vulnerability of seeds to climate change. We recognize the issue of limited land availability for many of them, limited access to finance, technology, and so on and so forth. So this is more goes to the root causes. So apologies if I didn't do that, given that I was more given, we're talking about the patterns, and we can see. But anyway, now in concluding, what I want to say in FAO, what we can do. Yes, I think we can support, and we have examples in which we work with countries. In fact, as a very concrete example, now we are embarking on a study on a project with Fiji on sugar. We are launching a study to analyze the sector, to understand the factors that are driving the sector, that impacting the obstacle, the challenges, of course, with the government, and the idea to come with very concrete set of actionable recommendations that are implementable. So this is just an example that we work with countries, and then we also for the climate change, and I think Angelica mentioned that in FAO we have the FAO strategy on climate change. We have an action plan for the implementation of that, and we work with countries to overcome those. But in addition to that, we can help in capacity development. We have courses, we have training, we work with countries, and this is made, it comes very important in the formulation and implementation of regional of trade agreement, whether regional or multilateral trade agreement. And as has been said now environmental regulation, they are becoming more popular, including in regional trade agreements. So it is very important, and we will be very happy to work with countries on how to reflect that and how to deal with that. So the capacity development, very important also in terms of complying with the SPS standards and how to improve access to markets. We have projects in that we can do. Trade infrastructure, it is very important. I think we talked about the transportation cost that related to trade, access to markets, and the marketing and communication infrastructure. In FAO, we have also programs, including the hand-in-hand initiative, in which we work with the country to identify those priority area for investment. Based on very on a framework, very established and well-established framework to work with the countries and bringing the donors together. So between the country and the donors, and to identify those areas in which investment give more returns and in which investment can be more sustainable and both not only economically but also in terms of responsible investment and also respecting the social dimension. Market transparency, I think this came because I also saw, I think so, a question in terms of price volatility. It's very important for the countries to have information, to have up-to-date information, credible information on markets, on access, on policies. And this is something also we do in FAO. We work with countries to establish and build a market information system at the country level. And the benefit of that, in addition to having the market information system built at the country level, they have access to the global system, which is in FAO. So they know they have a global view on the market situation, on prices, on production, on trade, on imports, exports. So that's also being, and information is money, as we say, being informed. So that can help the country in benefiting from trade opportunities. And the last point, Angelica, and I will close there. I know I took probably more time than I should, is raising awareness. I think it is very important, and an event like this is very important, right? I mean, yes, I understand and that these are many issues are well documented, they are well known. Nevertheless, I think it is important to continue with those, to continue to the dialogue, to bring the different multi-stakeholders around the same table to find solution. I think this is very important. So I would stop this, and I hope we'll have more events for this, and I hope such events can have an impact and then can make a difference and change at the country level too. Thank you, Angelica, and thank you to all the participants. Back to you.
I'd like to thank everybody, speakers, panelists, participants here for your active engagement in today's discussion. Understanding the dynamics in the context of trade in the context of SIDS is crucial for them to transform their agri-food systems, and trade presents some opportunities, some great opportunities for economic diversification, job creation, access to healthy diets. But SIDS, as mentioned, also encounter lots of challenges to harnessing the benefits of international trade. And in this regard, FAO looks forward to working closely hand in hand with governments, as Boubacar mentioned, generating evidence, for instance, the market information systems that are both at a local and a global level, capacity building, and through raising awareness and having discussions of this type. So we look forward to support SIDS governments to leverage trade as a means to foster inclusive and sustainable growth to build a better future for all. Thank you very much. The session is now concluded. And one more thing, sorry. The recording and the PowerPoint will be shared, as I've seen that there's lots of interest online and receiving them. So we will share them with you shortly. So the session is concluded. Thank you very much to everybody.